Good evening, beautiful humans, and welcome to a brand new segment on this channel called Making Our Lives Look Better by Laughing at Other People's Failures, or as I like to call it, blah, blah, blah. I hope you all have your non-flammable attire on tonight because things are about to get spicy. I love dragons. In fact, I totally believe they're real and that they're going to enslave us all one day. So why not get a head start in kissing their ass? There is one dragon though, I think he's some kind of purplish color, who actually dedicates his life to saving all people, and that is Spyro. Spyro is a franchise I was really briefly into during my earliest gaming years, like maybe for like a month, as I have somewhat fun memories of playing the original entry on my cousin's PlayStation. Thus, when I saw Reignited was announced, I couldn't resist taking the opportunity to finally get into this franchise. But I'll be honest, I haven't played through it yet. No! Sorry, but a lot of my free time is honestly taken up by Taylor Swift tier lists on YouTube. I mean, like, it's such a busy hobby. But the day has finally come that I dive in with my trusty dragon wings and embrace the flames that is Spyro the Dragon, by playing his most hated games of all time. Yeah, just like his orange twin, when Spyro was released into the wild, we got a variety of titles of varying qualities. So what better way to get into this franchise than by playing the worst games imaginable? Cause you know, everything I play afterwards would just look better by default. I took all the Spyro games, averaged out all the Metacritic scores, and ranked them on a top 10 list in order of the lowest average critic scores. Who will burn the competition, coming out as the most hated title in the franchise? Let's fly straight into it and put an end to all these really terrible puns. So the beginning of our journey begins with a new beginning. Yeah, that was totally unplanned. My mind is so sexy. The Legend of Spyro: A New Beginning is the first game in the Legend of Spyro trilogy, a reboot of Spyro developed by Chrome Studios. Spyro is sent on a quest to find a captured guardian dragon so the Dark Master doesn't return from his prison. An evil dragon named Cinder uses her dark minions to harness the power of the 4 guardian dragons, which are fire, electricity, ice, earth, you know, the Avatar stuff, in order to open the Dark Master's prison, thus bringing terror throughout the lands. With this reboot, the gameplay is now a little bit more combat based rather than platforming, which was following a very annoying trend during the time. I'd heard and seen a bit of this reboot when it was first announced, but I can't say I was all that interested in giving it a shot given my practically non-existent interest in Spyro. If my experiences with Crash the Titans are anything to go by, I wasn't positive I was going to enjoy this game. So when I played it, well, what do you think? I gotta say, I think the art style is kinda nice. It has a mid-2000s charm to it, and I like how fantastical everything still looks, albeit the colors are a little bit more washed out than I would like, but this was a pretty common color scheme around the time, I guess. The game control is fine, but at least in the beginning, there's not much to the combat besides just mashing the same button. There is a decent amount of satisfaction though from setting your foes on fire and watching them literally run for their lives. In fact, this is probably the most entertaining thing about this game, but otherwise it's just there. I mean, it works, but it's not really that interesting at all. I thought Titans was a boring beat 'em up, but at least that game had a fun atmosphere and a jacking mechanic to make things somewhat interesting. The game does teach you more moves as you progress, but honestly, the basic button smashing of the melee button will probably be all you need to get through the game. The gameplay is not the worst part, however, cause good God, there are so many cutscenes to sit through in the first few hours, which lays out a story that is completely and utterly dry. I got a bit of an Avatar Last Airbender vibe from it, except it doesn't have anywhere near close to the amount of humor and likability from the show. Everything about this game just feels like a try-hard American anime imitation. Spyro is basically a mid-2000s Shadow the Hedgehog, but without that ironic edge that makes him hilarious. The only part of the game that actually tries to make things more lighthearted is Sparks, who can suddenly talk and apparently talks like a cool uncle, but honestly just needs to leave, like now. His lines feel extremely out of place compared to the world that they're in and how everyone else speaks. It probably would have been less jarring if Spyro would at least return a little bit of that energy, but nah, Spyro literally leaves Sparks high and dry the entire game. It's just really awkward to sit through. It's not a terrible game, but it makes sense to me why it is on the list at this spot. The game scored a Metacritic score of 66.67 out of 100 across all versions. Eurogamer were pretty mixed on the game, giving it a 6 out of 10. It tries hard to reinvent the beloved franchise. A gorgeous soundtrack and classic sound effects will send fans into full-on nostalgia. The plot is solid and it links in perfectly specifically of the later games, but at the end of the day, the gameplay is repetitive and the enemies are too many and too hard to defeat. IGN actually seemed to enjoy the game, giving it a 7.7 out of 10. We assumed that 10 at revitalizing the series would be purely at face value, but are pleasantly surprised to see that the franchise has gotten a serious lift in nearly every area. The overall gameplay was extremely solid for a children's title, the overall presentation was baffling complex, with everything from scripted story events and innovative enemy entrances, and the overall audio/graphical design is definitely stronger than we expected. GameSpy, however, gave the game a 5 out of 10, saying, "I have to admit I'm disappointed with A New Beginning. Despite some smart moves on the part of the developers, voice talent, good graphics engine, franchise overhaul, none of them really pan out and bring much to the experience, leaving the game to flounder with its new but repetitive focus on combat. This New Beginning kind of made me want to go back to the old beginning, Insomniac's original Spyro the Dragon for PS1. I feel like that last review points out exactly why some people can find joy from this game while others don't. It's a solidly built game in and of itself, but it's not what made people fall in love with Spyro. As a result, many fans coming to the game will just be disappointed it's not a reskin or an advancement of the original trilogy. A New Beginning is not a terrible game, and some people might find some interest in its lore, but it definitely isn't one I'm interested in returning to afterwards. I'm just not big on beat 'em ups, but if you are, by all means give it a shot. Just go for a bathroom break whenever Spark starts talking." Before we continue on, I have quite the heroic tale to tell you all. It was Black Friday. Clouds were thundering. Angry parents and all were crowding the hallways of Walmart. I managed to grab the last copy of the most valuable item of the night, but once I did, this little girl with the eyes of Puss in Boots gave me the sweetest pout in the world. So what did I do? I danced in her face with my Mariah Carey Funko Pop figure. Spyro, A Hero's Tale is the 5th console game in the original Spyro series, developed by Eurocom Entertainment Software. Ooh, sounds fancy. The game introduces a new antagonist, Red, the former Dragon Elder banished years before the events of the game, and it sees Spyro try to stop his plot to corrupt the realms of a bunch of his friends who are all playable. It's a game styled very similarly to the original trilogy from what I can tell, but I mean, there's a reason it's on this list, I guess. But upon playing it though, it's not that bad. I mean, maybe I'd have to play through the entirety of the trilogy to understand, but I honestly had fun with the brief time I spent playing this game. From what I can tell, it's an interconnected open world and you basically go all around doing stuff to get to the end of the game. I'll admit, my memory is a little hazy on what the actual objective of the game is, but honestly, that wasn't integral at all to my enjoyment of the game. It reminded me so much of a lot of my favorite games growing up, like Battle for Bikini Bottom, Crash to Insanity, etc., and Spyro had some solid control overall. There's even a little humor implemented here with Spyro, and I love the slightly snarky tone he has here. It's one of my favorite aspects of his character. I mean, based on what I played of the trilogy, this really doesn't feel all that different from that game. If anyone watching is a major Spyro fan and wants to help point out some differences to me, then I definitely appreciate it, but coming from the perspective of someone who's not really into Spyro, this game really doesn't feel that different and it just feels like a nice little expansion on the original trilogy's gameplay. But yeah, playing as Spyro was a lot of fun for me here, and I'm curious to get further in the game. Maybe I stopped playing before it got bad, I don't know. I only got to play as Blink the Mole of the other playable characters, and I guess he was fine. He basically was a generic platformer character to me with some basic double jumping and climbing abilities, but the way he's inserted into the game makes him a nice breath of fresh air, rather than a character that detracts from the main experience, which is exploring the open world of Spyro. Let's take a look at the critic reviews, cause yeah, I'm honestly confused on what there is to not like about this game. The game received a Metacritic score of 62 out of 100 across all platforms. GameSpot scored it a 5.8 out of 10. Although Spyro's production values have shot up, its gameplay has remained more or less the same since the series' 1998 debut. Back then, players lacking Nintendo 64s didn't have too many good 3D platformers to choose from, so Spyro's gameplay foibles were acceptable in light of its uniqueness. The novelty has worn off. Today, modest improvements on this tired formula, like giving Spyro's once vestigial T-Rex-like arms the ability to grip ledges, just aren't enough to make the game feel innovative. Filling the title with disruptive and boring minigames to artificially increase playtime apparently wasn't a good move either. Despite all the new window dressings, Spyro: A Hero's Tale is the same game you played 6 years ago, and you probably remember it being better. IGN was a little more positive, giving it a 7 out of 10. It delivers a decent amount of fun. While lacking innovation in style and play mechanics, the game controls well and offers enough challenge and length to warrant a hard look by parents looking to buy a game for their kids. Also, the inclusion of new characters, new attacks, and a ton of collectibles will keep a collector nuts playing for at least 15 hours. In the end, A Hero's Tale is a definite improvement over Enter the Dragonfly. It's a solid, albeit simple and slightly unimaginative platformer. Gaming Target just slammed the game with a 4.9 out of 10. Maybe I'm being too tough on the little guy. No, wait, no I'm not. It's the other way around. Spyro is tough on me. think about it. We have here a sucky new Sparrow game with idiot enemies and challenges that are many times really like walk in the park. The only way to look at it is this is a poor excuse for a game. Okay, I had to stop reading. I don't even know what they're trying to say because they're just trying to be the next AVGN. To summarize, it looks like a lot of people's issues with the game comes from the fact that the game doesn't do too much to revolutionize the original Trilogy's gameplay, and also the fact that the gameplay was considered outdated at this point, despite tons of platformers like it coming out around this time. But what can you expect from FPS boys, I mean critics? I guess I'd say it makes perfect sense why I like the game. It's similarly built to the original games and doesn't do much to screw it up. I do recall having more fun with the Reignited Trilogy, but this game as a new fan isn't that far off, so I guess the only people that really dislike it are Spyro fans. That's a little funny, you gotta admit. So I've been doing lots of complex research that requires every degree attainable at a community college, and I discovered something shocking. People love change. You gotta shake things up at every point of your internet career to keep the audience engaged. So excuse me as I begin RidersDX's transformation into a Mean Girls cosplay channel, much like Dawn of the Dragon's aesthetics. The Legend of Sparrow: Dawn of the Dragon is the third and final installment in the Legend of Sparrow trilogy, as well as the 10th anniversary game of the series. It was developed by Untitled. I probably butchered that to space, and I don't care. This is the first Sparrow game that allows the player to fly at any time they want, according to the box art, so we'll see what they actually mean by that. The game also features a co-op mode with Cinder, who I assume I was supposed to meet in a previous game. In A New Beginning, Sparrow had to travel through the level and defeat enemies in a linear fashion. However, in this game, they claim that players can explore larger areas and collect items in order to progress through the game. So I guess we'll see what it has. It definitely sounds interesting on paper, but upon playing this game, it literally was a bigger culture shock than me realizing that Taylor Swift wasn't the president of space. Man, I don't know what happened between the first game to this one, but tone and aesthetic wise, this game is a huge change from A New Beginning. The game almost gives me an Elder Scrolls kind of vibe, which is a really weird way to describe a Sparrow game, you gotta admit. You're immediately thrown into combat, which isn't too different from A New Beginning, but you do get access to all 4 elements you must have gotten from that game, which actually makes combat a little bit more interesting this time around, and I found myself having a little more fun. As I progressed through the game though, that same issue of it being too repetitive did come into play, but I guess it wasn't as prevalent this time, and the reason for that is because what is actually different about this game compared to the original. What's different is that you're placed into these more open worlds that you're able to fly throughout, sorta. The flying mechanic is really not intuitive at all because in a practical sense, you're not actually able to fly. What it actually does is it allows you to travel throughout these worlds faster as you fly at a certain level above the ground, and that's about as high up as you'll get through this mechanic. I have to say that I actually had a lot of fun with this. It makes me really yearn for a fully open world Spyro game where you're able to fly wherever you want. Despite how limited it actually is, it was still a ton of fun to use and shows a lot of potential that this has. And so if Activision wants to go for like a Breath of the Wild like Spyro game, then I'm totally for it. Please, Activision. I know the budget would be humongous, but like, come on. I suppose this game surprised me a lot actually, like with how much I loved how different its aesthetic, tone, and presentation is. The difference between this game and A New Beginning is that Dawn of the Dragon is 100% committed to its identity, instead of trying to balance both the old and the new. And I don't know, but that confidence this game has is actually very appealing to me, and I did not mind the story nearly as much here compared to A New Beginning, despite what they did to Hunter. It's really different though, so it definitely wouldn't be the most appealing thing to most classic Sparrow fans, but if you're more open-minded, you might be able to appreciate it. This game is almost like what would have happened to Sonic if 06 were actually successful. Also, this Golem thing is basically Iblis. I mean, am I wrong? On the critics side though, the game scored an average Metacritic score of 61.67 out of 100. Xbox Achievements gave the game a 65 out of 100. In reality, the game is enjoyable for what it is. As long as you leave high expectations at the door, you may find you can enjoy a single playthrough of Spyro's latest adventure. There's a lot of charm to it, but a mere fix of the camera and a more enjoyable flight mechanic could have done wonders alone. Game Chronicles were pretty positive in their review of a 7.7 out of 10. Spyro fans and gamers in the target age group are going to love Dawn of the Dragon, and don't be surprised if the older siblings in the house and even the parents get caught up in the magic that is Spyro. It really is fun from start to finish. Meanwhile though, 1UP gave an extremely scathing review, scoring the game a 3.3 out of 10. But decent 2-player co-ops just catch up on a crap sandwich. Game's buggy as hell with severe slowdown, characters getting hung up in the level geometry, and stuttering audio. I'll admit, the game is a bit buggy and the flying isn't what I expected it to be, mediocrity, but it's a game that just shows off a lot of potentially good ideas for the franchise, and that really just makes me like it more despite its flaws. I'm completely over the beat 'em up gameplay at this point, but I really love to see Spyro attempt something like this again and make it like actually good. So I don't know, Dawn of the Dragon may not have been successful in what it was trying to do, but it tried, and I love it for that. What do you get when you mix purple with orange? Firefox? Well, yeah, that's actually true, but no, in this case, what you get is a bad idea. Spyro Orange: The Cortex Conspiracy is a companion game to Crash Purple, which are both platform games developed by Vicarious Visions for the GBA. The story centers on a plot to wreak havoc on the universe by Dr. Neo Cortex and Ripto, who have recently joined forces, if that wasn't already obvious enough. Now, I had recently talked about the Crash Purple version in my video on the most hated Crash games, which you can check out in the top right corner, and let's just say I wasn't impressed. So, did Spyro fare any better? Well, to put it simply, it's practically the same game except you're playing as Spyro instead of Crash. So it's a little less annoying, I guess, because most games actually give you a few hits before you need to start over, which fits in line with the health system in Spyro. However, the game is not better or worse in my eyes. Basically, the game is structured where it places Spyro in this 2D hub world you can platform through, which gives you access to portals that put you in various minigames you need to win to continue throughout the game. I mean, these minigames aren't terrible, it certainly isn't like they're absolutely insufferable, but I can't help but think this was such a low effort way to capitalize off the hype of a crossover between these two franchises. Crash and Spyro are two of the most iconic platforming icons we've ever witnessed, and they were basically destined to cross over in this way one day. So to see a crossover amount to what's practically a low-hanging Mario Party fruit is disappointing to say the least. Also, there's just something off about Spyro's jump that I can't put my finger on. Maybe if I played the game more I would have figured it out, but I didn't, so yeah, I absolutely hate his jump here. The game scored an average critic score of 60 out of 100 on Metacritic. GameSpot scored the game a 5.9 out of 10. Whatever the reason, there are fewer enemies, fewer obstacles, and fewer creatures like mice and butterflies puttering around in Spyro's game, which makes Spyro Orange seem like it was hastily thrown together in comparison to Crash Purple, even though both games share the same graphical look. PGNX Media actually loved the game, giving it an 8 out of 10, the game's highest score. The minigames are satisfying despite their slight repetitiveness and are quite a bit of fun. If there is another mini-games focused Spyro game in the future, the platforming elements need serious work, but overall the game style works. Toy Chest, whatever that site was, I've never heard of it, gave the game a scathing 3.5 out of 10. The Frankenstein's monster of a game I played does little more than scratch the underside of mediocrity. Buy this for an irritating nephew, but keep yourself and those for whom you care for deeply away from this game. I do find it interesting that Crash Purple had a slightly better score with 67 out of 100. Thinking about it, the game does feel simpler and easier than the Crash equivalent, but both games in my eyes honestly don't live up to the hype of a major crossover between platforming icons, which is a shame. I think unfortunately that mindset for these games really doesn't do anything to help the games like be more enjoyed by the general public, because people really wanted something better and bigger for a crossover between these two, and so the fact that these games are what they were is just disappointing. Now, even if it wasn't under the disguise of a crossover, I still don't think these games would be received that well, because they're simply just not that fun in my opinion. But obviously there are some people that liked it, so if you enjoy this game, then all the best for you, and well, at least a crossover did happen, right? Oh hey, so I really decided to embrace the idea of an eternal night and kill off the sun. But then I realized that electricity is actually really expensive, and it's not like I can live my whole life without any kind of light. So I've decided to utilize a natural form of light. Yeah, this is fine. The Legend of Spyro: The Eternal Light. Not light. The Legend of Spyro: The Eternal Night is the second game in the Legend of Spyro trilogy, also developed by Chrome Studios, picking up exactly from where the first one left off. I won't go into any details about the story in case there are like any dragon lore enthusiasts out there, and I guess those people would be the ones that care about it, but this is essentially an extension of A New Beginning, with that same linear gameplay and beat 'em up mechanic encapsulating what you do in the levels. So is this game any better or worse? it's worse. The game truly does have the exact same engine and feel as A New Beginning, but does look a little sharper with it being on the Wii, and that is the end of the improvements. I mean, I wouldn't call it a terrible game because it doesn't do too much that's different from A New Beginning, but the disappointment comes from it not doing anything better than a game that had a lot that could have been improved on. Combat is still as repetitive as it was. In fact, it actually got a little worse. The enemies they throw at you require different strategies to defeat, which sounds like a positive, but it honestly just leads to longer playtime and the game seemingly more dragged out than before. Also, the game has this section where you're relearning Sparrow's fire abilities, and gosh, the jump is so floaty that I fell multiple times just trying to get used to it. Like, what is it with these games and Sparrow's jumping? I suppose a positive is that it doesn't spend nearly as much time on the story and let you dive more quickly into the game, but that was to be expected since the game picks up right from where the last one left off, so there wasn't really a need to do that. I just felt like I was playing a longer, more drawn out experience of A New Beginning. I couldn't really bear to continue after an hour of playing it, which is unfortunate. Oh, and the Wii version tries to incorporate motion controls into the combat, which was a very bad idea. The Eternal Night scored an average Metacritic score of 57 out of 100. GameSpot scored it a 5 out of 10, criticizing the platforming elements. Spyro's awkwardness may approximate the clumsiness of a juvenile dragon, but it isn't that much fun for the player. A platformer lives or dies by the effortlessness of its controls, but the frequent knockbacks, inelegant jumping, and overall frequency with which a button press has no on-screen result makes Spyro feel much more like a sack of flowers than a nimble dragon. PALGN gave the game a 6 out of 10. If you liked A New Beginning, then there is little reason why you shouldn't pick up The Legend of Spyro the Eternal Night. The game uses the same basic combat system, adds a few new elements to it. Just don't go expecting too much more. IGN utterly slammed this game with a 3.5 out of 10. After boss fights over bottomless pits, sloppy platforming bits with a spoon-fed storyline, battling wave after wave of enemies was the breaking point. Just thinking about that part makes me want to punch babies. It's pointlessly difficult and absolutely unnecessary. Come to think of it, that describes the whole of Spyro's latest outing rather nicely. I mean, IGN is doing a bit much with the punching babies thing. That's actually kind of problematic in today's standards, but anyway, he makes a good point. This is basically what made me quit the first proper level. It just isn't worthwhile enough to push through for me. There were just too many enemies and they required too many different strategies, and they had these high health bars and they killed you way too quickly. I was just like, yes, this is challenging, I guess, and difficult, which is good for a game to offer, but like, it's not fun. You know, it has to be the kind of challenging that's actually fun to play through and actually motivates you to keep going. But like I said, if you like The New Beginning, this will probably be satisfying enough for you, but like, only if you really did actually like it. What do you get when you take a game as obtuse as Dawn of the Dragon and stuff it into this? Not a cat in a box, sadly. The DS version of Dawn of the Dragon was developed by Tantalus Media, who are apparently most known for porting PS1 games to the Sega Saturn. This ought to be good. The game takes on the exact same narrative as the console iteration, pulling dialogue from that one to advance the story, which to be honest is pretty efficient. Plus it's got some pretty nice art thrown in there too for cutscenes. The actual game is a 2D side-scroll platformer that contains a lot of similar elements with combat. The big difference here though is it really sucks. It's basically one of the most generic 2D platformers I've played in a while. You play as Spyro or Cinder and basically utilize generic platforming elements to get through some really basic levels. I understand that they were probably a lot more limited here in comparison to the console version, but it's not like 2D platformers are typically void of anything creative or interesting. You could basically plaster any licensed TV show character on top of Spyro and it honestly would make sense 90% of the time. They do try to make combat a little more interesting by utilizing the elements to make certain enemies more prone to a select few compared to others, but this just feels like a lame attempt to pad out the combat sequences. Also, why does the very first enemy you encounter take like 20 hits to kill? Even for a beat 'em up, that has got to be overkill. There are these on rails flying sections that you play through as well, which are fine, I guess. I mean, they work and it looks kinda cool, but it's not much in terms of entertainment either. It's really just there for me. The game received a Metacritic score of 57 out of 100. IGN gave the game a 6.2 out of 10, sounding pretty mixed on platforming and combat. The game has all the elements of a successful and challenging action experience, but there are too many little issues dragging the fun down. The fact that there are two dragons to control open up potentially cool design ideas, but the differences between them aren't as wildly varying as you expect them to be. The designers offer up some cool possibilities and combos using these two dragons since you can switch between them on the fly during attacks, but the action's hurt by sloppy and stiff collision and a combo counter that arbitrarily stops counting during some attacks, as well as keeps counting hits even after a pause of a few seconds. Game Chronicles scored it a 6.5 out of 10. The Legend of Spyro Dawn of the Dragon is a fairly decent DS platformer and action game, but because of its linear and somewhat shallow design as well as a number of minor flaws, it doesn't quite make it past that. Modo Joe were not impressed from the looks of it, giving it a 4 out of 10. Once you beat the game, few hours at best, there's no reason to return other than to torture yourself further. That said, unless you're a masochist, avoid The Legend of Spyro Dawn of the Dragon. It's about what I expected. If I'm being honest, there's just really not that many things about this game that stand out, good or bad. It's sort of just a game that's there. It really is just an example of why this era of games being on every platform imaginable probably came to an end. Sometimes they result in surprisingly good experiences, but for the most part they're just second-rate versions of the intended experience. Honestly, this probably could have been a Shrek game, and honestly the game probably would have been better if it was a Shrek game.
Now what do you get when you take a game like this and stuff it into this? The game is not that bad actually.
The DS version of Eternal Night was developed by Amaze Entertainment, who went defunct after 2 years. Man, Activision sure knows how to seek out the best of the best for these games. The game again uses the same premise and such and yada yada yada, but the game differs from Dawn the Dragon and the DS in the fact that it's actually a full-on 3D platformer. Color me surprised. Yeah, I was definitely intrigued just by looking at this. I'm always very interested in developers taking on full-on 3D adventures on the DS because it was really the first portable console where 3D games was actually possible on a handheld, and so it's always interesting to see what kind of shortcuts and things that developers would do to get these games to work. Upon playing it, it's sort of a light platform with basic beat 'em up mechanics, and the levels are sort of a smaller version of basic Mario 64 levels. Yeah, now that I think about it, I actually get a vibe similar to how the original PS1 games look, so I think presentation wise, it's just a little more nostalgic than they probably intended, which is not a bad thing. It's definitely a positive to me. The gameplay itself is nothing revolutionary, but color me appreciative of the fact that they even tried. I guess my bar is just that low for these games, but it's perfectly functional and it's pleasantly fun roaming through these areas in what basically feels like a miniature, slightly more linear Spyro adventure. The combat does have a little focus here, but not as much as its console version, which I actually greatly appreciate. You just smash a button repeatedly, which isn't anything to write home about. There is a weird mechanic though that tries to take advantage of the stylus. If you attack an enemy repeatedly enough, usually like 4 to 5 hits, they get launched into the air. If you jump, then you enter a sequence where you need to slide the stylus across the arrows on screen to finish off the enemy. I mean, this isn't offensive at all, and it is kind of fun at first, but it does get a little annoying to do with every enemy. If the game tries to throw more enemies at you in further levels, I can totally see this getting on people's nerves. It really doesn't add much, and it really is just a mechanic done to basically pad the combat out. But overall, I enjoyed my experience with the Eternal Night on the DS. I mean, I definitely liked it more than my time with the Wii version, so I'm a little saddened to see it higher up on this list actually, even if the score is not that different, because the game attained a Metacritic score of 56 out of 100. GameZone scored it a 6.5 out of 10. The platform levels are fairly interesting to play through, but they're not enough to carry the entire game. The combat in the levels is boring and the boss battle is confusing. IGN gave the game a 5.5 out of 10. I can definitely appreciate the team's attempts in bringing the true 3D Spyro experience to the Nintendo DS. It's honestly about time, but the game still feels like a step backwards. Clumsy storytelling, awkward gameplay, wonky camera, and awful boss battles. Thunderbolt gave the game its lowest score of 5 out of 10, but they actually sound like they kinda liked it. A likable adventure, while it contains many frustrating aspects that gamers would do well to stand, there's something in the game that makes it oddly appealing. I can definitely echo the sentiments of these reviews, especially that last one. I have a strange appreciation for the title just because it tries to be a fully 3D adventure, but it definitely could have used just a lot more polish and innovation in its design. Still, it's a cool novelty in the franchise, and I'd love to see more portable 3D adventures tackled in the future.
Hey Dad, hey Pop, I'm home. Hey son, so your Pop and I have something to tell you. You see boy, when your genetic makeup begins to morph you into something bigger, life becomes a shitstorm. So we decided to sell you for $10 to that guy. Wow, this isn't going to scar me at all.
Spyro Enter the Dragonfly was developed by Check 6 Studios and Equinox Digital Entertainment. It is the first main game in the series to not be exclusive to a PlayStation platform, and the first to not be developed by Insomniac Games, and so this is definitely gonna go well. The story begins after Year of the Dragon. The dragons are celebrating the rite of passage for the young dragons and for the Grand Dragon Parade, with the arrival of new young Dragonfly guardians for the baby dragons. But during the party, Ripto teleports and returns to capture the new young dragonflies to weaken the baby dragons.
dragons. But in a shocking twist, his spell misfires and the dragonflies become scattered throughout the dragon realm. Thus, it's up to Spyro to recover all of them. So full on confession, I'm pretty sure I've said at some point my only experience with Spyro prior to this past year was briefly playing the first game at my cousin's house. However, a look through my GameCube library reveals the existence of Enter the Dragonfly. Yeah, it's coming back to me now. My uncle had brought this game for me. I played it for like 5 minutes and then never picked it up again. He also brought me Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I definitely remember putting some hours into that game, so this is a good sign. At first glance, Enter the Dragonfly definitely feels like a traditional Spyro game, but then you really start to play it. First off, Spyro's control just feels really stiff in every way. He speeds up and stops awkwardly, and something about his jumps just doesn't feel quite right to me. It's not terrible, and it certainly is functional enough, but with how similar this game is to the originals, the difference comes off as staggering. What really drags this game down though is the lack of polish. This game is like a spoiled carton of milk, to say the least. The game starts off at a crisp 60 FPS during the cutscenes, but as soon as you get into actual gameplay, it jumps around everywhere and comes off as really choppy. There was also this one moment where the game couldn't figure out how to play Spyro during a cutscene, so he just walks around in a circle for a good 5 seconds. And then the game literally gives up and just has Spyro twist his head to face the dragon. This is simultaneously hilarious and disturbing. It's really unfortunate this game is so sloppily put together because I genuinely think they have a good foundation for a solid adventure here. It takes a lot of cues from the original games, and as a result, I did enjoy myself a bit exploring the levels. The game has a solid collectathon design to it with multiple dragonflies and collectibles to find the levels. It's not as interesting in terms of level design compared to the originals, but still a solid attempt nonetheless at recreating that Spyro magic. Honestly, I would have thought I would have liked this kind of game as a kid, you know, because I've definitely played platformers that are about as choppy as this one as a kid and ended up loving them. But I don't know, I guess there was something about the level design maybe, or just about the feel of the game in general that just kind of turned me off, and I was just like not interested at all in this game. So sadly, all the good ideas in the world can't cover up the fact that this game is just a poor man's version of the original trilogy due to its buggy nature, and that's just really unfortunate. The game scored a Metacritic average of 52 out of 100. IGN gave the game a 6 out of 10. If you want to play something that's easy and comfortable, that doesn't challenge you in any way, then you'll like this. If you want something entirely new or even remotely resembling a next generation experience, then forget it. Spyro is still a cute, adorable, and very likable character, and this game is mindless, easy fun, but simply more of the same old stuff. Nintendo World Report scored a 4 out of 10, slamming the game's performance. This game runs about as fast as a snail in Valium. While running around the dragon realms, the overworld of the game, if there's too many sheep or moving characters on screen, the game will skip frames excessively. It also happens while running or flying through levels where there are a lot of characters, and even sometimes when there aren't any characters in the area. This is just unacceptable. Once, while opening up my atlas, where all your game statistics are stored, rather than showing the book, it showed a black screen with nearly invisible writing, and GameSpot slammed the game with a 2.8 out of 10, criticizing the bugginess. Yes, Spyro is full of bugs in more ways than one. Collision detection, in addition to making the bubble breath a chore to use, will also do things like let you charge straight through an urn if you just use a breath weapon on it. The boundaries of objects are often larger or smaller than they appear. Sometimes your horns will go through an overhead object, and sometimes you'll have to get a bit of extra clearance before you can go under. I'm actually really disappointed the game came out in this way, because beneath all these issues is a game that I think could have been a decent successor to the original games. I guess this game drowned so that a hero's tail could fly, even if just for a few inches.
Hey friends, I'm just here at the cemetery of hopes and dreams where good ideas go to die when they're butchered for completely idiotic reasons. There was just one idea that was so good, so young, so destined to make people happy, but then it turned into Shadow Legacy.
Shadow Legacy is a role-playing video game that takes place after Spyro: Hero's Tale and is also developed by Amaze Entertainment. Are you ready to be amazed?
Boo! You stink!
I never knew of this game prior to this video, but I gotta say my interest definitely peaked. A Spyro role-playing game seems like a natural direction for a series like this to undertake. You could come up with so many lore-rich details to make the game truly glow with that Spyro essence. So let's talk about what we actually got. A dark storm appears and traps everyone within the Dragon Realms, Avalar, and the Forgotten Realms in a strange dimension known as the Shadow Realm. After initial guidance and being granted the Shadow Stone from Elder Thomas, Spyro must master the martial art of Dragon Kata and the use of magic, rescue everyone, and unravel the mystery of the Shadow Realm. This all sounds exciting and all, but
This game is actually the complete opposite of that. Admittedly, I only got about an hour into the game, but all I played was something that almost felt like a point and click adventure. You navigate Spyro through a top-down map exploring the Dragon Realms, basically going to where the game directs you to go. First off, Spyro is just painfully slow here. He's almost like a turtle. I guess since the map isn't the biggest, they didn't want you to blaze through all the locations, but man, couldn't they have upped the speed just a tad? It might as well just be a loading screen. There is combat involved here, I guess, but nothing like turn-based stuff. You just smash buttons to attack the enemies here. I literally just stand there and press the buttons repeatedly until the enemies fall. Like, this guy over here isn't even attacking, he's just absorbing all my hits like he's some sponge. Maybe there are more dangerous enemies later on, but man, I expect all enemies to at least, well, try. There is an interesting mechanic here where you can use these portals to transport yourself into the Shadow Realm, which may allow you to access different areas on the map. I didn't see too many interesting things during my short playthrough, but I can imagine this playing a more interesting role down the line if I was able to continue playing long enough. I kid you not, I literally stopped playing and lied on my bed for a good half hour since boredom just happens to tire me out, but at least the idea is cool. The game scored a Metacritic average of 50 out of 100. Cheat Code Central gave it a 5.4 out of 10, criticizing the unpolished feel of the game. There are a lot of bugs in this game that seriously decrease the enjoyment value. Slowdown occurs when multiple enemies appear on screen. The frame rate of the sprites may be smooth, but the scrolling background is jerky in comparison. The camera angle tends to hide some enemies from view, and the collision detection system will find you clipping, getting caught in scenery, and missing your platform jumps. Add to this the overly loud and distorted sound effects, and you'll wonder why you shouldn't care about this game when it's obvious the developers didn't. Game over reviews were a little more positive with a 65 out of 100, but just a little. Spyro Shadow Legacy is competent at best as an action game, but that's about all the praise I can give it. Fighting boils down to jamming on one or two buttons and hoping that the enemies get stuck in loops so that you can slam them forever. Don't believe me? Try headbutting a few of the early enemies, rapid fire style, and see how often you get hit. The AI seems to enjoy falling for simple exploits, and Eurogamer slammed the game with 4 out of 10. Spyro would score a 5 were it to work properly, smack bang in the middle of middleness, doing nothing well and utterly without imagination. For goodness sakes, traveling back and forth between two versions of reality. Where did they get that idea from? But throwing the bugs and scrabbly programming, and it thankfully falls to a 4 and justifies all the angry frustration, horrible analogies about killing baby dogs. Who the f wrote this? To me, this game is basically a regular Spyro platformer, but without the platforming. So what you're left with is just a really boring experience with some minimal RPG elements. This is not to say that I don't want to see a Spyro RPG though, especially with the cast of characters it could have. I'd love to see Activision attempt a proper Spyro RPG on consoles and such. It could be a really fun turn-based outing and really dive into the depth of the Spyro franchise, and so I don't want this game to be like a detractor from it. But for now, you'll have to wait, I guess, for who knows how long, because I really don't recommend you check this out. Like, not even if you're so curious you could spend an hour looking at paint dry.
So it's all come down to this. Who did it? Who became the most despised game of the entire Spyro franchise? I bet it's one of those Skylander games. How dare Activision turn a beloved franchise like Spyro into one of those toy-for-profit franchises that make nothing but money? I'm so glad the general public agreed and placed Skylanders at number... Okay, so, this is weird. I guess the number one most hated Spyro game of all time is, a random GBA game. Yeah.
Thought we were done with the Legend of Spyro games, eh? Nope, the GBA version of A New Beginning is officially the lowest rated Spyro game thus far. Funny enough, this was not developed by Amaze Entertainment, as they actually developed the DS version, which got a surprisingly decent reception. Nope, this was handled by none other than Chrome Studios. Man, they really f***ed this franchise, but in their defense, they had to make both this and the console iteration. Like, I guess Activision really didn't care. I gotta say, I was pretty shocked to see this one top the list, but it's gotta be up here for a reason, right? It's just such a random title to be up here, so it's just like, oh, okay, a random GBA version of a console game. That's officially the worst Spyro game ever. Like, isn't that crazy? It's just a generic 2D platformer, much like the DS version of Donna the Dragon. There's really not much to talk about here if I'm being honest. It's about the most uninspired platform I've played in a while. They don't even try to incorporate any interesting mechanics they had going on in the console version, at least not enough anyway. The combat here is literally just mashing the attack button repeatedly until the enemy dies. Although admittedly not as bad here as Dawn of the Dragon, since the enemies require less hits. What gets annoying is how an enemy is there at literally every part of the level you're in. It just got so boring for me that I started jumping over them, which actually wasn't that hard. But yeah, it's a pretty anticlimactic choice at number 1. I actually don't think this is the worst game on this list, but I guess we'll see what the critics have to say. The game scored a Metacritic Metacritic average of 44 out of 100. Ace Games scored it a 5 out of 10. Despite its flaws, The Legend of Spyro New Beginning on the GBA does offer a decent handheld-sized bit of side-scrolling platformer action, looking and sounding pretty good in the process, but disappointingly, the game comes and goes in the blink of an eye, lasting only around 2 hours tops with no replay value to speak of. IGN gave the game a 4.5 out of 10. The Legend of Spyro New Beginning fails to capture the appeal that the past games had. The graphics are pretty bland, and the gameplay, while at first glance promising, turns out to be insultingly easy. For longtime fans of the series, this game is going to be a letdown, and newcomers that are picking up a Spyro game for the first time are going to get burned. Then GameSpot absolutely slammed the game with a 3.9 out of 10. The Legend of Spyro New Beginning for the Game Boy Advance is an all-around disappointment. Instead of rekindling people's interest in the Spyro character, it's likely to make them swear off the Purple Dragon's future adventures. Vivendi and Chrome Studios had the right idea in starting the franchise over from scratch, but they could have at least come up with something better than a tired side-scroller that feels 5 years out of date and barely takes 2 hours to complete. The game's tired and unoriginal, not much to really say. I suppose you could have worse games at the top spot though, so at least Sparrow has that.
Well, I think we all learned something here. Every person that's ever worked on a Spyro game is doomed to be brutally murdered by meat-loving dragons. But what's also really interesting to me is that none of these games are actually really that bad. I mean, playing through all of them, like, I found something to enjoy in pretty much all of them, and so I guess Spyro kind of fared a little bit okay, you know, despite what the scores look like. I really think that every game that I played over here had like some kind of redeeming quality, if any.
They definitely tried their best to replicate the Spyro formula with games like Enter the Dragonfly and The Hero's Tale. I honestly feel like if these games did a little more to separate themselves from the trilogy, and also if one of them was way less buggy, they probably could have gotten a better reception. But of course, comparisons are bound to happen no matter what they put out even now. It's kind of unfortunate but unsurprising to see the Legend of Spyro reboot take up most of this list. I actually think as a concept and storyline, Legend of Spyro had a lot of potential to elevate Spyro to a space he hadn't been in before, but sadly the combat of all these games was just not cutting it. People ultimately overlook these games. I think if Activision can find a fine balance between taking a lot of cues from the original trilogy and also injecting their own ideas into future titles, the Spyro franchise can definitely churn out quality games. We saw examples of games going too far in both directions in this video. Making a Spyro game cannot be easy, but I'm confident with the Reignited trilogy in their arsenal, they have what it takes to make something great and make sure Spyro is around for a long time.
Well, I guess until Activision decides to do something with Spyro that isn't a remake, I'll just continue paying respects to the dragons by doing my nightly praying session. Home, please don't come when you take over the world. Home, please don't come when you take over the world.
Thank you so much for watching this video. Special shout out to my patrons, Amelia Prescott, Team Rattle Sign Gamer, Johnny Hinton Ortiz, Trash Q, Claw84, and Mass Muner. These are my patrons / YouTube members. If you'd like to become a patron or YouTube member and get access to a whole bunch of different perks, then please check out the links in the description box below. But alright, this is Riders, riding out.